Number 10. Thomas Busby's chair. Perhaps the strangest abandoned object that people don't know enough about is nothing more than a chair, which in the 1600s happened to be the preferred chair of a thug, thief, and drunk named Thomas Busby who lived in North Yorkshire. That doesn't make it super impressive, as many chairs have been owned by some unsavory characters. But there's a little more to the story here. The chair was set up in his favorite inn, and he absolutely hated anyone else sitting in it. Well, Busby ended up killing his wife's father in a fit of rage, bludgeoning the man to death with a hammer. He was found out for his crime and sentenced to death in 1702. He was made to hang from a gibbet with his body dipped in tar. Then his body to be placed on display outside of his favorite inn, which, soon after his death, was renamed the Busby Stoop Inn until it closed in 2012. But here's where the abandoned object comes in. One version of the story says that Busby's last order of business was to curse the chair before he died, claiming that anyone who sat in his favorite chair would meet a swift death. Apparently, people took the threat very seriously. There was even a report in 1894 about a guy who sat in the chair and then was found the next morning hung from outside from a post. To keep people safe, the chair was eventually abandoned and hung from the ceiling so nobody could sit in it. To this day, the chair is still hung from a ceiling to keep others safe, though it's now sitting in a small museum in the town of Thirsk. I wouldn't sit in a chair with a curse on it. Would you? Number 9. Abandoned Foxtrot Navy Submarine. This abandoned Foxtrot Soviet submarine was apparently delivered to the Libyan Navy from the USSR sometime between 1976 and 1983. It was one of 6 submarines given to the Libyan Navy, and perhaps one of the only remaining vehicles. 4 out of the 6 of these submarines were decommissioned by the end of the 1900s and cannibalized, to keep the remaining 2 submarines working for as long as possible. This abandoned sub, which is apparently sitting in a rural part of Russia, was likely ripped apart to fix other submarines. There isn't much more information about it, other than the fact that it's definitely not functional. It has been abandoned for a very long time, and it doesn't appear as though anyone will be coming to its rescue anytime soon. These submarines have been obsolete for some time, and like a lot of the old Soviet war machines, it's been forgotten and left to decay. Someone could probably steal this submarine and refurbish it if they had the right equipment, and get back underwater with it. The government would probably not be too happy about that. Number 8. The Castell No Pools. The Castell No Pools are abandoned objects located near Barcelona. These pools were apparently used by people in the 1980s to cool off during the summer season. People would bus in from all over the country just to play in these giant, refreshing pools. There was also mini golf, a cafeteria, and some very large trampolines nearby for the locals' amusement. However, one year, rumors began to spread that the pools were not safe and were even deadly. Also, it was rumored that several children had died from jumping on the trampolines. The rumors ended up scaring all the locals, and people stopped showing up to the pools. They were eventually abandoned and neglected, and today they are a ghostly shell of their past glory, mostly adored by filmmakers and ghost hunters. However, it's never been confirmed that there is any supernatural activity involved in these weird pools. It's highly likely that they're just very creepy looking. And so some people think there are ghosts hanging around. The ruins can still be seen today of these once glorious pools, now decrepit and certainly not a safe place to go swimming. These would have been a cool place to shoot a music video though. Have you ever gone to an abandoned pool? What did you find there? Why did you go? Tell me about it in the comment section down below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already. There are more awesome videos just like this one coming out all the time. Number 7. The Belcourt Castle Chairs. Rhode Island is one of the oldest settlements in the United States, established back in 1690. It's also home to the Belcourt Castle, one of the most incredible abandoned buildings in the country. The castle was constructed by an architect named Richard Morris, who had designed the castle for a bachelor in 1894. However, the bachelor only resided in the extensive home for about 8 weeks out of the year. Then, when he died in 1908, the castle fell into disrepair. The castle sat abandoned until the 1940s, when it was sold to an entrepreneur who wanted to turn it into a car museum. Of course, that never happened. The property was then used to hold jazz festivals, but the upkeep of the property was neglected. In 1956, the property was acquired by the Tenney family, who filled it full of strange antiques and then basically left it as a living museum. Many of these antiques proved to be haunted. This includes a set of 17th century samurai armor, a mirror from the 18th century that hangs inside of the music room, and a pair of old salt chairs that might be the creepiest abandoned objects in history. These chairs are located in the Gothic ballroom, and those who have visited the empty castle have claimed that the chairs are haunted by spirits, with one occasion having 70 visitors witnessing a bolt of lightning shoot from one of the chairs. Number 6. Rare Chinese Vase. A rare Chinese vase was abandoned in a French attic sometime in the 1900s. The Chinese vase sat in the attic collecting dust for at least 3 generations. The man who discovered the vase in the attic of his family home believes that it probably was purchased by his great-uncle a very long time ago, perhaps in the beginning of the 1900s. A little curious about how much the vase could be worth, the guy took it to be examined by professionals, where he learned that it could be worth upwards of $850,000. The vase is the only one of its kind, according to Sotheby's Paris, the same company that put the vase up for sale at auction. It was probably produced in China during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor between 1735 and 1796. The only other pieces of pottery like this are currently sitting in a collection at the National Palace Museum in Taipei, which shows you just how rare the vase is. This also goes to show that you should always be curious about what's sitting inside your attic, as you never know if you have a $1 million artifact that's been abandoned by an old member of the family. There are a lot of stories about abandoned antiques in attics that turn out to be worth millions. Keep your eyes open and you might be lucky enough to find one of your own. Number 5. Mummified Baby. Now, here is something extraordinarily strange and scary. A mummified baby was apparently found abandoned inside a house attic that belonged to the great-uncle of a man named Charles Peavy, and it has caused a huge controversy. But to understand this bizarre abandoned object, we need to go back to the beginning. According to the report from Seacoast Online, Charles Peavy's uncle had loved a Hawaiian woman about 80 or 90 years ago, and she had carried his child. But unfortunately, the child died at birth and was stillborn. For whatever reason, Charles Peavy's great-uncle kept the corpse of the baby and mummified it, then stuffed it into his attic and forgot about it. The other really crazy part is that Charles Peavy has a collection of family memorabilia that goes back 2 centuries, and the mummified baby is just considered to be part of the collection, added to it when they found it preserved inside his great-uncle's attic in Manchester. But here's where the controversy comes in. Charles Peavy's 4-year-old niece was overheard talking about the mummified baby with another kid at school, saying that her uncle was a murderer and he kept a dead baby in the house. Police got involved, the mummy was actually confiscated, and forensic anthropologists examined the mummy and refused to give it back. After all, it was literally a dead baby. Number 4. Witches and cat bones. Some very creepy objects were recently discovered by archaeologists inside of a 17th century cottage during a construction project in Lancashire. The cottage was found near Lower Black Moss Reservoir out in the rural countryside. Archaeologists had been brought in to survey the area before engineers could get to work with the construction project, and they found the remains of a strange building hidden underneath a grass mound. According to the recent report from BBC News, historians are now claiming that the cottage may have belonged to one of the infamous Hindle witches. Inside the bizarre cottage, archaeologists found a sealed room complete with cat bones bricked inside of the wall, which were likely used by witches to protect the cottage and those within it from evil spirits. However, there were no human remains discovered and no clue as to why the structure was abandoned and covered up with earth. I personally would never go in a building like this. It's too risky and too likely to be haunted. Number 3. Giant Monopoly. A man in California discovered something incredible when he decided to rip up the carpet in his house. What he found was a giant game of Monopoly that had been abandoned by the previous owners of the house and hidden beneath a boring carpet. The man from California moved into the bungalow house back in 2003, but it wasn't until just recently that he decided to renovate the house. What he discovered underneath the carpet was not only a massive game of Monopoly, but it was an adult Monopoly game, with silhouettes of naked women instead of the typical community chess. After discovering the strange Monopoly board, the man was actually able to get into contact with the previous owners of the house. However, they would not reveal the mystery behind their adult board game, which, for some strange reason, they decided to paint onto the floor of one of the bedrooms. And while the new owner of the game wanted to create life-size pieces to go with it, his wife at the time wouldn't let him. She forced him to paint over the Monopoly board on the floor. Shortly after, they got divorced. Unearthing that Monopoly game might have been bad luck for him. Number 2. Craig Eclair Castle. The Craig Eclair Castle in New York is one of the strangest abandoned buildings in the United States. It's located in the Catskills Mountains and is surrounded by so much mystery and intrigue that it just had to be put on the list. It's also known as the Dundas Castle, and nobody seems to be certain of its history. Nobody knows exactly when construction began on the original project, though educated estimates say that it began as a summer lodge for a man named Bradford Lee Gilbert in the 1880s. But when Gilbert passed away in 1911, that was when the castle really began to take shape. But here's where the story of this abandoned building gets really weird. After Gilbert died, Ralph Dundas took over the property for himself, but he died just 10 years later. And the year after his death, his wife was committed to a sanitarium. The castle ended up being abandoned. At some point in time, the property was purchased by the Masons, but even today, the place is decrepit and empty. Some say that on the full moon, the 3 heart-shaped ponds on the property even fill with blood. But of course, this has never scientifically been proven. Number 1. Abandoned heads. In the state of Virginia, there are 42 very creepy and abandoned heads of presidents that were apparently made by an artist from Houston who was inspired after he drove past Mount Rushmore. According to Insider Magazine, the statues were displayed for about 6 years in the President's Park in Williamsburg, but nobody really wanted to look at a bunch of creepy stone statues of presidents. So they were eventually transported to Croker, where they were supposed to be put inside of a stone crusher and destroyed. But rather than that happening, the guy hired to destroy them actually spent over $10,000 bringing them to his own property so that they could be saved. What's really crazy is that the presidential heads are now more popular because they're sitting in what appears to be an abandoned field on this guy's property than they ever were when they were at President's Park. And of course, this is because people just love abandoned stuff. Number 10. Alcatraz of the Rockies. One of the most secure prison facilities in the entire world is the Administrative Maximum Federal Correction Complex in Florence, Colorado. This place is known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, and it has been the home of some of the most infamous inmates ever. One of the most recent being Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who was convicted on drug trafficking charges and sent to the inescapable jail. This facility is located inside a very mountainous region of Colorado, and is referred to as a Supermax facility. Other famous inmates include the Boston Marathon bomber, the Unabomber, and a conspirator involved in the Oklahoma City bombings. Basically, anyone who commits acts of terrorism or kills people. The ADX Florence, as it's commonly called, opened back in 1994. It currently houses over 400 of the FBI's most violent inmates. It also houses inmates who are likely to escape. This is because there is no escaping from the ADX. Inmates like El Chapo get stuck in solitary confinement for about 23 hours a day and kept under camera surveillance. Since they've opened, not a single person has escaped. Inmates living inside the ADX Supermax prison have almost no human contact. They're only allowed outside for between 1 and 2 hours a day. They're not allowed to have contact with other inmates, and everywhere is reinforced with concrete and under constant surveillance. Plus, the prison is basically built into the mountains like a fortress. Even if you escaped, there would be nowhere to run. Number 8. The Vatican's Secret Archives. The Vatican's Secret Archives has been one of the most secure buildings in the world ever since it was separated from the Vatican Library back in the 17th century. It has recently changed its name to the Vatican Apostolic Archives to try and remove some of the mystery surrounding it, as those in charge insist there's nothing secret about these archives. But, of course, if you have a giant archive that nobody is allowed inside of, underneath Vatican City, it's always going to be suspicious. Scholars have had limited access to the records from the beginning. The archives are filled with state papers, transcriptions from ancient trials, including those of the Knights Templar, and other important documents and artifacts acquired by the Church over the centuries. In order to guard the secrets of the archives, Vatican City even has its own special military, known as the Swiss Guard, who protect everything inside the Vatican at all costs. For a few hundred years, not a single person was allowed to see the documents stowed away inside the archives. However, that did eventually change in 1881, when Pope Leo XIII allowed very limited access to historians. Then, in 2002, Pope John Paul II allowed researchers to access a handful of documents relating to the Vatican's relationship with Germany. Basically, access has only been granted to the secret archives when in the best interest of the Church. No one is simply allowed to wander around in the archives. Number 8. Fort Knox. When you think of secure buildings, you probably think about Fort Knox. Fort Knox is located in Kentucky and has been the gold standard for security around the world since it first opened as a gold vault back in the 1930s. The vault was named after Henry Knox, the first United States Secretary of War, and surprisingly, it only took a year to build. It also only cost about $560,000 at the time, according to the United States Treasury. And contrary to popular belief, it only holds about half of the gold in the United States. Fort Knox is one of 6 facilities in the country protecting precious metals. In the beginning, gold bars were transported to Kentucky aboard trains with help from the United States Postal Service. That has changed dramatically throughout the years. In fact, it's not even clear how gold gets to and from the facility, as that would be pretty silly information to give to the public. What we do know is that Fort Knox's walls contain at least 16,000 cubic feet and 750 tons of reinforced steel. There are also 670 tons of structural steel and an underground complex of impenetrable layers and advanced technological security. The vaults are built of steel plates encased in concrete, and the vault door itself weighs at least 20 tons and is fully blast-proof. Basically, Fort Knox is a literal fortress. For decades, visitors were not even allowed inside Fort Knox. In 1974, one delegation from Congress was allowed inside the facility, and the New York Times wrote that there were 36,236 gold bars stacked from the floor to the ceiling, with nearly $2 billion worth of gold inside a single room. Nobody was allowed back in the facility until 2017. Number 7. Bold Lane Car Park. The Bold Lane Park-Safe Car Park in England is known as the safest parking lot in the entire world. No other parking lot has the kind of stringent security measures as Bold Lane. According to the BBC, Bold Lane has enough space for 440 cars and has never seen a case of theft or vandalism in all its years of operation. What's truly fascinating about Bold Lane is that its designer began engineering the project after his car window was smashed, and his car stereo was stolen in the parking lot of an airport. Angry, a man named Ken Wigley designed the best parking lot ever. It has sophisticated security cameras that watch every inch of the facility. There are panic buttons, entry doors use barcode tickets to keep safety parameters up, and there are special sensors that will go off if a parked car moves before it's supposed to. If one of the cars is tampered with or moved, a full lockdown will ensue, shutting down the entire facility. It seems a little excessive if you ask me. They're just cars, but I suppose if you have a very fancy vehicle, you'd want to store it here. Number 6. Iron Mountain. Iron Mountain is exactly as secure as it sounds. It's an underground vault built into the side of a mountain that stretches 220 feet below ground. The entire complex is naturally protected by the mountain, and it was built inside of an old limestone mine. Iron Mountain is used as an underground repository for records and valuable information. and it encompasses an area of 1.8 million square feet. Iron Mountain was designed to protect the most important information in the United States, from humidity, extreme temperatures, and natural disasters. There is 24/7 monitoring here, armed guards every second of the day, and cutting-edge technology trusted by the highest levels of government. But it doesn't stop just at security. The Iron Mountain complex has a constant temperature optimal for storing valuable data on disks, tapes, and hard drives. Even more, records are able to be shipped in and out of Iron Mountain for instant access. The records stored here are able to be converted into digital information and sent to the owner. And there are estimated to be about 2,300 companies worldwide keeping their records stored inside of Iron Mountain. There is one entrance protected by a steel gate that weighs 3 tons. The facility is fireproof, it's protected against flooding and lightning strikes, and the only way in is with a verified identification that must be cleared by security personnel in advance. If you have secret information, this is the place to store it. Number 5. The Doomsday Seed Vault. One of the most fortified places in the world is a facility located deep in the heart of an icy mountain far above the Arctic Circle, somewhere between mainland Norway and the North Pole. But this secretive facility is not used for keeping prisoners or gold, it's for the future of humankind. This is the Doomsday Seed Vault, and it holds more than 930,000 varieties of different crops, representing 13,000 years of agricultural history. This is a giant safety deposit box full of seeds, holding an almost complete collection of the agricultural biodiversity of the human race. It's known as the Global Seed Vault, and it's located on the Svalbard archipelago in Norway. As you can probably imagine, this is not the kind of place you're going to stumble upon on your next road trip. It's in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and is the farthest place to the north that you can fly using a commercial airline. Nobody goes to this place, which makes it pretty secure already, but the vault itself is also very difficult to enter. The vault has only one opening, the majority of the seeds are kept inside of a concrete layer deep inside of the mountain, and the only vault currently in use is so full that its door is often covered in a thick layer of ice. If you really wanted to get into this vault, it would probably be easier than breaking into Fort Knox, but after you stole a bag of seeds, which have literally no monetary value, you would be stuck fleeing across the high Arctic, where you'd probably be eaten by a polar bear. Number 4. The DMZ. One of the most militarized places in the entire world is the border that separates the two Koreas. The DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone, is a buffer that stretches from coast to coast across the entire Korean peninsula. 155 miles long, or 250 kilometers, and just over 1 mile wide, 1.6 kilometers. Each side is separated by razor wire, traps that can blow up a tank, and some seriously heavy weaponry pointed at the opposite side. But what a lot of people don't know about the DMZ between the Koreas is that it was a major frontier in the Cold War fought between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Demilitarized Zone was the end of the war when an armistice was signed on July of 1953. Nobody ever actually won the war. The United Nations forces, led by the United States to take down the communist forces in China and North Korea, ended not with peace or with a treaty, but with what was essentially a ceasefire, which is still going on today. You might be able to sneak across the land border from Mexico into the United States, or the other way around, but good luck moving from one Korea to another. Every single inch of the DMZ is being watched by 160 guard posts on the northern side and 60 guard posts on the southern side. Plus, the DMZ is littered with up to 970,000 landmines. You'd be blown up by underground explosives or shot by nervous, twitchy guards. Would you ever visit North Korea? It's so different from life in the West, but it's a bit dangerous if you aren't extremely careful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more intense videos. Number 3. The zombie-proof house. There is a zombie-proof house in Poland, the likes of which you have never seen. When it comes to impenetrable fortresses, the safe house in Warsaw is the best there is. It was designed as a luxury mansion that could withstand even the worst zombie invasion. From the outside, the house looks like some kind of closed factory. When closed, it's nothing more than a slate gray box with no doors or windows, surrounded by a couple of trees. However, the house does open up and looks like a completely normal mansion. It's just that with a single push of a button, every window and entrance closes behind impenetrable concrete doors on hinges. The entire house can be sealed at a moment's notice, so tightly that not a single zombie could ever get inside. Plus, the zombie-proof house is surrounded by a zombie-proof outer shell. There's even a retractable drawbridge for extra safety to move in and out of the home. The lockdown system is operated by electronic engines that can be activated from anywhere inside the house. If you're worried about a zombie apocalypse, this is the ultimate mansion for you. Number 2. Hollywood Hills Fortress. Speaking of ultimate mansions, there's a fortress located in the Hollywood Hills that recently went up on sale for $4 million. What makes this fortress so valuable? Well, it's been designed as one of the safest homes in the world. The mansion sits on top of a grassy knoll. It's 7,744 square feet, or 720 square meters. It's earthquake-proof. It has a wine cellar that doubles as a security bunker. The security system is able to unleash disorienting fog spray through the house to cripple home intruders. The windows are bulletproof. There's a helipad on the roof for a quick getaway, and the walls are reinforced steel. Not even a grenade could blow apart the exterior walls of this mansion. Plus, the mansion is gorgeous. It's located in one of the richest neighborhoods in the United States and offers spectacular views. It also doesn't use keys. The mansion uses biometric recognition software, keeping out those pesky lockpickers. According to what the designer of the house told Forbes magazine, it was designed so that 3 generations can survive an apocalypse inside of the house and become the new Adam and Eve. Of course, that's assuming it's stocked with 100 years worth of food. Number 1. The Bank of England Gold Vault. The secret vaults beneath the Bank of England hold roughly $248 billion worth of gold, according to a recent report from The Independent. That's about 1/5 of the entire gold stockpile in the world, and it's hidden right underneath the streets of London. Britain may not own as much gold as some other countries, but they definitely guard the bulk of the global stockpile. And seeing as they have so much gold to keep an eye on, the security measures are absolutely insane. Gold bars are kept on numbered shelves inside a concrete safe deep under the ground. This underground safe was originally built in the 1930s and is still accessed using a small collection of keys that are 3 feet or 1 meter long. The security experts in charge of keeping the gold safe believe that using these big, complex keys is actually safer than relying solely on electronic access. But wait, because that doesn't mean there are no electronic safeguards. The only way into the vault is by speaking a password into a microphone that matches the visitor's voice with saved samples in the computer. And these are just a few of the precautions that we know of. When you're guarding hundreds of billions of dollars worth of gold, you can't just tell the world everything about your security measures. If you could sneak into just one of these places, which would you choose? Number 10. The Megabat. The giant golden-crowned flying fox is the largest bat on Earth, with a monstrous wingspan of up to 5.5 feet or 1.8 meters. These creatures are known as megabats, and they are literally terrifying. This bat is the size of a small child, and they can be seen at night soaring through the air in the jungles of the Philippines. Even more freaky is that these huge bats generally hang out in colonies of up to 10,000. Picture 10,000 children in vampire costumes streaking through the sky at night. It's enough to make you run for shelter and cry for your mother. Luckily, megabats are completely harmless to humans. They don't feed on babies, they don't suck your blood, and they actually only feed on figs and fruit. These bats are herbivores. They also aren't very heavy, with a weight of only around 2.6 pounds or 1.1 kilograms, despite their large stature. Also, megabats don't use echolocation to get around like other bats do. They have excellent sight and smell, and can navigate through the night sky remarkably well. But with a name like a megabat, you'd think they were a lot more dangerous, wouldn't you? They sound like evil carnivorous creatures in a horror movie. If they ever developed a taste for humans, that would be the end of local residents and their habitat for sure. Number 9. Giant George. From 2010 to 2012, a dog of gigantic proportions held the Guinness Book of World Records title of tallest dog. This was Giant George, a dog of such biblical size that he made appearances on popular shows like Animal Planet and The Oprah Winfrey Show. Unfortunately, George passed away back in 2013 at the young age of only 8. But he is still a legend today for being such a huge and surprisingly gentle giant. He was 43 inches, or 1.1 meters tall at the shoulders, with an impressive weight of 245 pounds. From nose to tail, George was 7 foot 3 inches. He lived in Tucson, Arizona with his family and was a humongous Great Dane. George had a pretty good life as well. He slept at home in a queen-sized bed, he liked driving around in the family's golf cart, and he was even given a full row of 3 airline seats when he flew to Chicago to appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Sadly, large breed dogs like George live short lives, probably because their hearts have to work extra hard to keep pumping blood throughout their massive bodies. George was treated like a rock star, and his presence in the world will be missed. Do you own a dog? What breed is it? How big is it? What's their name? Tell me about it in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already. If you like this video, then you'll love what's coming out next. Number 8. The Congo Snake. The Congo Snake is often considered to be the biggest, most mysterious, and strangest snake to have ever been photographed. The alleged encounter with this giant snake came in 1959, when a World War II pilot was returning to their base from a mission. While flying, the pilot witnessed an enormous beast of a serpent that some estimates have placed at being around 50 feet or 15 meters in length. That would make it larger than any living anaconda, and even big enough to rival the extinct Titanoboa. The man who physically witnessed the snake was Colonel Remy van Lierde, a Belgian pilot in World War II. He actually became one of the first Belgians to ever break the sound barrier back in 1958. He was considered a hero and a completely honest man, which makes his account of the snake that much more believable. Also, he saw the snake slithering through an extremely remote and largely unexplored part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He even turned his helicopter around and made a few extra passes at lower altitude just to see the snake again and get a good photograph of it. In his mind, there was no doubt that this was the biggest snake on Earth. Unfortunately, because the picture is so old and fuzzy, and because another similar snake has never been found, there's no way to confirm or deny the existence of a gigantic monster snake living in the Congo. I want to believe it exists, though. Number 7. The giant Gippsland Earthworm. The giant Gippsland Earthworm is the biggest, longest, and ugliest earthworm you will ever encounter. Almost nothing is known about the physiology of this worm, other than it can grow up to a shocking 9 feet or 2.8 meters in length. This is the typical kind of earthworm that you would find in your garden, only extra long. The worm is so big that when it was first discovered in Australia back in the late 1870s, farmers originally thought it was a type of snake. It wasn't until samples were sent to the University of Melbourne that they were discovered to actually just be giant worms. Unfortunately, one of the reasons almost nothing is known about these huge worms is that farmers have basically destroyed their population by farming much of the land where they live. It's actually made these worms into a protected species, and so they're very difficult to study. But according to Australian Geographic, the worms definitely live deep underground, they love wet soil, and they build an underground network of clay tunnels that can go on for hundreds of feet. And yes, they are incredibly slimy and super gross. But if you found one of these, it could feed a whole flock of chickens or a whole school of fish. Number 6. The alien squid. When people think giant squid, they think of the legendary kraken of mythology and sailors' tales. Giant squids are real though, and are recognized as being some of the biggest monsters living in the ocean. But there is a far stranger cephalopod floating on the coast of Australia that rivals the giant squid both in size and in creepiness. It's known as the big fin squid, but it looks more like an alien squid from an alternate dimension. In the past 30 years, there have only been about a dozen sightings of the big fin squid anywhere on Earth. These creatures are very rare, and they live thousands of feet beneath the surface of the ocean. It actually wasn't until just recently that researchers managed to catch one on video off the coast of Australia. Almost nothing is known about the big fin squid, other than it appears to be about 6 feet long, it has tentacles roughly 11 times longer than its body, and it is a strange, translucent color that makes it look kind of ghostly as it swims through the water. According to Popular Science, these squid could be living in the deepest and most unexplored parts of our ocean, which is why we barely ever see them. Number 5. The coconut crab. The coconut crab is one of the largest, strongest, and meanest crustaceans on Earth. Like the other giants from today, not everything is known about this huge terrestrial invertebrate. Charles Darwin was actually the first to describe the coconut crab as growing to a monstrous size. But what else is there to know about these giant critters? Well, as the name suggests, coconut crabs primarily eat coconuts. That in itself is not so scary. They have custom-built claws that will allow them to produce around 1,500 newtons of force, which is more force exhibited than any other claw-carrying member of the animal kingdom, according to National Geographic. The coconut crab is so strong that it can crush a coconut with its claw and slurp out the juices. But guess what? Coconut crabs are also mean. They have been caught eating other species of crabs, catching birds out of trees and scarfing them down, and even hunting rats. And while there is a pretty slim chance of getting into a fight with a coconut crab, be sure to protect your shins if you ever do. One quick snap of the coconut crab's claw could literally shatter your ankle. Number 4. The Himalayan Yeti. Some people believe that the Himalayan Yeti is a real animal. And if this does turn out to be true, it would make the Yeti one of the biggest creatures on Earth. The Yeti is generally believed to be an enormous ape-like creature with big feet, big teeth, and a big coat of white fur. It supposedly lives in the snowy regions of the Himalayas, and mostly keeps to itself. But just how real is this animal? Is the Yeti a giant, or just a giant urban legend? Here's the deal. The truth that almost nobody talks about is that the Yeti is actually part of the indigenous legends and histories of the Sherpa communities who live at altitudes of up to 12,000 feet in eastern Nepal. For hundreds of years, the Yeti has existed to local Nepalese culture as an obvious mythical figure, not a real animal. But in 1921, when Charles Howard Bury went on an expedition to Mount Everest and spotted an enormous footprint, the local legend turned into a global sensation. Ever since then, there have been dozens and dozens of supposed sightings of the Yeti, but no evidence to back any of them up. Even with footprints, bone fragments, and hair samples being touted as proof, they've always been disproven. Number 3. Cantor's giant soft-shell turtle. The Cantor's giant soft-shell turtle is not the largest turtle in the world, but it is still a giant in its own right. This turtle lives all throughout southern India and Southeast Asia, and it lives primarily in muddy rivers. The turtle is amazing for its crazy size, and the fact that it kind of looks like a squashed pancake. The Cantor's giant soft-shell turtle spends about 95% of its life buried under the mud, not moving a single muscle. The turtle just sits there in the muck its entire life, waiting for crustaceans or mollusks to get close enough to eat. But as for the size of the turtle, it has been highly debated. Some accounts have placed the turtle at being up to almost 6 feet, while ordinary reports claim that it's actually less than 4 feet. Still, for a squashed pancake that spends its life under the mud, the Canters soft shell is one giant animal. Number 2. The ocean sunfish. The ocean sunfish is the heaviest, bony fish in the entire world. This thing looks like a giant dinner plate with a fin on its top and a fin on its bottom. These fish have been caught weighing up to 5,100 pounds, and the distance between the top and bottom fins can be up to 14 feet. This is not the kind of fish you're going to reel in during your next river fishing trip. These beasts live deep underwater in the ocean, feeding primarily on jellyfishes. This may sound strange considering jellyfishes are basically just water and almost no nutrients, but they are nonetheless the staple food of the giant ocean sunfish. One of the most fascinating aspects about the sunfish is just how fast it grows. A single sunfish can gain hundreds of pounds in a single year, even though they are absolutely tiny when they are born. A newborn sunfish is less than a gram, meaning an adult sunfish is 60 million times larger than a baby. It's one of the most impressive growth transformations in animal history. And even more amazing is that the ocean sunfish releases up to 300 million eggs at a time, more than any other vertebrate in the animal kingdom. Number 1. The giant Ghana snail. The giant Ghana snail is huge. Any animal with giant in its name is likely going to be big, and the Ghana snail is no exception. These slimy snails are the biggest in the world. They are native to West Africa. Some people call them giant tiger land snails, and they can grow to be an entire foot. To try and understand this a bit better, look at your hand. From the bottom of your palm to the tip of your middle finger is probably less than a foot. This means the giant Ghana snail is so big that it couldn't fit in the palm of your hand. And get ready for some cool facts, because the Ghana snail is full of them. A single snail is able to lay between 30 and 300 eggs at a time. Also, a single snail can breed by itself, because these snails are hermaphrodites, meaning a single snail can turn into hundreds, then thousands, then even millions. These giant snails would quickly take over the world if they didn't have predators out there making them into fast snacks. What's the biggest animal you've ever come across?
Number 10. The heresy transcripts. In 1307, the Knights Templar were arrested and tortured on charges of heresy and being immoral. This was one of the biggest controversies of the medieval world and has been debated for centuries. The one responsible for the torturing of the Templar leaders was the King of France himself, King Philip IV. The exact happenings of the trials of the Knights Templar have been kept hidden in secret inside the Vatican's secret archive, and they detail exactly what happened to the Knights Templar and the truth behind their destruction. But while these transcripts have remained secret for hundreds of years, the Vatican recently released the transcripts of the heresy trials of the Knights Templar in limited edition volumes. The Vatican produced 800 copies of the collection in leather-bound documents. But don't worry, you'll never get your hands on one. They were bought up almost immediately by individual collectors, libraries, cultural organizations, and internationally famous people, according to the president of the publishing house that prints documents for the Vatican. Why do you think that is? It's all quite suspicious. But of course, it's easy to see why the documents would have been hidden from the public for so long. Historians all agree that by the early 1300s, the Knights Templar had become too rich and too powerful. The only way to put a stop to the secretive order was to throw allegations of corruption at them. And the only way for King Philip to settle his debts with the order was to simply quash them under these made-up allegations. Number 9. The first air machine blueprints. The blueprints for the world's first air machine are believed to be hidden inside of the Vatican. It seems awfully strange that the designs would be hidden for so long, but they were kept secret for centuries. The blueprints were created by a Brazilian-born inventor named Bartolomeu Lourenço de Gusmão in the 18th century. The inventor showed off the idea for his miraculous flying device to the King of Portugal in August of 1709. He used a paper balloon and a candle to demonstrate his idea for a hot air balloon, and it worked. He had plans to craft a massive machine called the passarola, which means bird in English. The machine would be filled with tubes and would look just like a giant bird, and it would use fire to fly across the world. Unfortunately, this was the 18th century. People in Portugal called the inventor a wizard. He became utterly terrified of the Spanish Inquisition and burned all of his documents, manuscripts, and ideas, then had to disguise himself and flee the country, where he died shortly later in 1724 without ever building his machine. But even after the inventor's death, the ideas behind his machine lived on. Some copies of his blueprints survived and were preserved and are believed to still be kept inside the Vatican itself. In fact, his flying machine was the inspiration for the first hot air balloon that took flight 74 years later, in 1783. Number 8. Three Secrets of Fatima. The Three Secrets of Fatima is a series of apocalyptic visions that were allegedly given to three Portuguese shepherds named Lucia Santos, Jacinta Marto, and Francisco Mato back in 1917. These three young children claimed that they were visited by the Virgin Mary herself. The apparition has since become known as Our Lady of Fatima. According to the children, the Virgin Mary bestowed upon them three secrets, but the secrets were not revealed until much later in 1941, at the request of the Bishop of Liera. The third secret was revealed in 1943. Lucia Santos wrote the third prophecy in a letter that was to be sealed and not read until 1960. It would not be until the year 2000 that Pope John Paul II released the secret to the world. Up until then, all three secrets were allegedly kept inside of the Vatican. The three handwritten prophecies penned by Lucia Santos herself. Yet, even after the third secret was revealed to the public, there were many who said the Pope was keeping parts of the secret hidden, and there have been many allegations that the truth of what Lucia Santos wrote on the notes is still heavily guarded by the Vatican. By now, you're probably wondering what the secrets were. The first secret was a vision of hell. The second secret was a prediction that the First World War would end and that another war would commence soon after. The third and most secretive of all the secrets pertained to the widespread persecution of Christians in the 20th century. However, there is still controversy to this day over what was truly written by Lucia Santos regarding the third secret. Number 7. The largest collection of adult videos. There have been rumors for a long time that the Vatican houses the largest collection of adult content in the entire world. This rumor actually dates back hundreds of years. Back in the Renaissance, people said that the Vatican held inappropriate drawings and vulgar relics. Then, in the modern age, the rumor persisted, with people saying that the largest collection of adult artifacts, films, pictures, and other paraphernalia is housed somewhere inside of a secret room in the Vatican. That sounds pretty bizarre and not likely true. What's the story? Evidently, all experts on the subject deny these claims to the end. Even Snopes fact-checked the allegations and declared the rumor 100% false. The Vatican museums hold some suggestive content, sure, but it all has historical value. There are over 1.5 million scholarly books and over 150,000 precious manuscripts in the Vatican, but probably not any explicit material. It's not clear where exactly the rumor came from or why people believe in it, but the rumors don't hold any merit. Even when Father Leonard Boyle retired from being the chief librarian of the Vatican Library in 1998, he denounced the rumor, claiming to have never discovered any proof of such blasphemous content inside the Vatican. Number 6. The Chinese Scroll. One of the strangest secrets hidden inside the Vatican is an old Chinese scroll from 1650. There are almost no documents from Asia inside the Vatican's immense archives, but this one is incredibly strange. The letter was written on silk by the Chinese Empress Dowager Wang, who had adopted the Christian name Helena. She was not just one of the only Chinese empresses, but also one of the only Catholic rulers of China. She had originally been converted to Catholicism by Jesuit priests. The letter she wrote was sent to Pope Innocent X and delivered inside of a bamboo tube, complete with the inscription of a black dragon. Apparently, the empress had been forced to flee her home by the ruthless Qing dynasty and had been appealing to the Pope for some kind of assistance. Alas, the Pope died before he could ever grant the empress an audience. If she had been given more attention, it's interesting to think about what kind of relationship the Vatican could have made with China, and how different the world could look right now. Number 5. The damnation of Galileo. Galileo is still believed to be the father of modern science, and yet, over 350 years ago, the Roman Catholic Church held a trial for Galileo because they basically thought he was an evil magician. Galileo was the first man who spoke out that the Earth is in fact round, it is not flat, the world does not move from east to west, and that it is not the center of the universe. Galileo figured out that the Earth orbits the sun, but this was in direct conflict with the holy and divine scriptures, and it landed Galileo in hot water. In 1633, he was placed under investigation by Pope Urban VIII on suspected heresy. Galileo Galilei was forced to recant his claims that the Earth revolves around the sun under the express threat of torture. It was a huge step backwards for the progression of science and society. For 350 years, the trial transcripts were kept secreted inside of the Vatican. It wasn't until just recently that steps were taken by the Roman Catholic Church to publish all documents in the secret archives relating to the physicist's unfortunate condemnation. It took the Church nearly 4 centuries to basically admit that they were wrong, and Galileo wasn't really evil after all. However, the Church didn't do this for fun. They revealed the transcript as part of a plot to show the world that the things hidden inside their archives aren't secret or suspicious. Though, to be honest, the whole thing feels kind of weird. Like there are more secret documents they aren't showing us. Number 4. The time travel machine. Believe it or not, some people claim that there is a time machine hidden inside the Vatican, known as the chronovisor. A man named Father Pellegrino Ernetti apparently helped to create the chronovisor, which he then used to observe with his own eyes the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Of course, this is a pretty far-out claim. There has never been any proof anywhere in the world that any kind of time travel device exists. And yet, the chronovisor is supposed to give users the ability to see through the ages. The existence of this machine has never been proven, though the Vatican priest named Father Francois Bernet claimed in a 2002 book that he saw it for himself. The machine was apparently built in the 1960s with help from a team of scientists, including the former German scientist Wernher von Braun. Using this machine, the scientists were apparently able to see things that happened in the past, and this allowed select members of the church to look upon the real events of the Bible. The chronovisor allegedly works like a television, allowing people to tune to a specific time and place. But of course, every mainstream scientist in the world has labeled the chronovisor as totally fake, and pretty much all the claims put forth by the former Vatican priests have been denounced. What do you think? Is time travel possible? Is a chronovisor something that we could have, even someday in the future? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already to get the latest videos right when they come out. Number 3. Magic blood. One of the weirder things hidden inside of the Vatican is a vial of dried blood believed to belong to Saint Januarius. The vial contains the dried blood of the patron saint of Naples. And in 2015, at a cathedral in Naples, the Pope kissed the vial filled with the dried blood and it miraculously liquefied. This miraculous event was apparently a sign that Saint Januarius loved the Pope. The act was done in front of thousands of people inside the cathedral, and the Pope claimed that the blood was only partly liquefied, meaning that the saint probably only loved them halfway, and they all needed to work harder so that the saint could love them more. And yes, this is a real thing that happened and that people believe. The vial of blood is one of the most precious relics in the city. The saint had apparently averted a massive eruption from Mount Vesuvius through prayer in the 4th century. There's no scientific evidence to suggest that a vial of blood can hold any magical properties or in any way influence literally anything. But it's still a pretty big deal in the Catholic faith. Number 2. The Pope and the Holocaust. The Vatican and the Nazis have a pretty controversial history. During World War II, Pope Pius XII was leading the Catholic Church. Throughout the war, he remained completely silent while millions of Jews were being killed during the Holocaust. The refusal to condemn Germany during the war represented a shameful moral failing of the Catholic Church. Some have claimed that the Pope stayed out of the affairs of the Nazis because if Hitler had won the war, he would have wanted to become Hitler's Pope and save the Church. Some have gone so far as to claim that Pope Pius XII was actually Hitler's pawn. Well, all of the Pope's activities during wartime were documented, and they have been housed inside the Vatican's secret archives ever since World War II. Until just recently, these documents were forbidden to be viewed by anyone. However, in an attempt to save face, the Vatican decided to release some of the files for historians to examine. This proved to be an atrocious idea. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, the revealed documents proved that the Pope learned about Jews being murdered back in the fall of 1942. The documents also showed that church advisors dismissed the reports and called them exaggerated. Representatives of the church then lied to the United States government and said that the Vatican was unable to confirm whether Nazis were actually participating in these crimes. Basically, they covered it up. And sadly, this doesn't make the church look very good. Number 1. Secret tunnels. The Vatican may be the smallest country in the entire world, with a population of only 1,000 people and only 110 acres, but there are more secrets hidden within Vatican City than almost anywhere else on Earth. One of the biggest secrets is actually hidden in plain sight. It's a secret tunnel named the Passetto del Borgo, and it has been used for hundreds of years as an escape passageway by popes facing imminent danger. The secret tunnel runs about 2,600 feet along the old walls of the city and links Vatican Palace with Castel Sant'Angelo. It was completed in the late 1400s and used for the first time just 2 years after by Pope Alexander VI, when King Charles VIII of France invaded Vatican City. The most recent time that the secret tunnel was used was during the sack of Rome on May 6, 1527. Almost all of the Swiss Guard, who actually still protect Vatican City to this day, were slaughtered on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, though they held off the invading force just long enough for Pope Clement VII to escape using the secret tunnel. Considering there is only one secret tunnel we know about, who knows how many other secret tunnels are beneath Vatican City and where they might lead. Number 10. The White Widow. The most wanted woman in the entire world among all the dangerous and violent females on this planet is known simply as the White Widow. She's suspected of being a terrorist who plotted to blow up several different resort hotels in Kenya packed full of tourists during Christmas. This woman is a Westerner. She has praised Osama bin Laden, and she is a jihadist who has eluded the law even while traveling through Africa with her 4 children. Honestly, that's quite impressive, even as violent and unhinged as this woman is. Her real name is Samantha Lethwaite, and she was born to a British soldier and lived an ordinary childhood in England. At some point, she became a little mixed up. Samantha's first husband blew himself up as a suicide bomber during one of the worst terrorist attacks to ever occur in Britain back in 2005. Her second husband later met a similar fate. However, she has multiple children from both men, even as she continues with her terrorist activities. Samantha's notebooks were seized in 2011, and investigators found them filled with praise for extremists and her own private hopes that her children would grow up to be the same type of people. What's truly strange about Samantha is that nobody knows how she became radicalized. She converted to Islam as a teenager, but nobody knows for sure how she moved from being an ordinary white woman in England to becoming involved in this unique strand of radicalized Islam. It's a sad story of how someone became more and more detached from their family and devoted their life to violence. But it's all true. Now, the White Widow is currently an international fugitive, and nobody has any clue where she is. Number 9. Shante Henderson. In 2007, the only active woman on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list was captured and charged with second-degree murder. Shante L. Henderson was 24 years old when police arrested and charged her with the death of DeAndre M. Parker, who had been shot while sitting in a pickup truck outside of a convenience store. Henderson was a gang member and extremely dangerous. Clearly, she was not someone you'd want to mess with. But her gang activity led her to kill a man, and after the murder, she fled law enforcement to avoid prosecution, and it took over a year to catch her. The latest news related to her indicated that she was being held on a $250,000 cash bond. However, she won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. The FBI said that Henderson is a person of interest in at least 5 additional homicides and 50 additional shootings. What caused this individual to become so violent and ruthless? It probably has something to do with her upbringing, but some people are simply mentally predispositioned to become incorrigible criminals. Number 8. The Russian Spy. Anna Chapman was seized by the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a Russian spy who had been hiding undercover in Manhattan as a real estate agent. She was arrested along with 9 other Russians who had been part of the largest foreign intelligence network to operate on American soil since the end of the Cold War. Anna and the other spies had infiltrated American society as white-collar professionals, and this happened just a few years ago. If you thought spies were a thing of the past, think again. However, nobody is really sure what exactly Anna Chapman or the other dangerous spies did while living in the United States. They had apparently been sent to the US under orders from Vladimir Putin, but it's not exactly clear what their mission had been. What we do know is that Chapman had been dating an ex-Marine with an unknown level of security clearance, though not even her ex-boyfriend can be certain what kind of secrets he let slip or just how useful they could have been to a foreign government. Anna used her body and charm to wriggle her way as high up the ladder as she could before eventually being found out. She was only found out because of an undercover agent who met with Chapman as an undercover Russian agent and tricked her into admitting who she was. Number 7. France's Most Wanted. The most wanted fugitive in all of France is a 26-year-old woman named Hayat Boumediene. She was the wife of the terrorist who killed hostages inside of a Jewish supermarket in Paris back in 2015. Police believe that Hayat was connected to those responsible for the Charlie Hebdo massacre and that she had helped to orchestrate various terrorist attacks in France. She has since been found guilty of financing terrorism and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Unfortunately, for those who want her in prison, she has yet to be found. She was sentenced, but she was never actually captured and put in prison. Hayat is still a fugitive and should be considered extremely dangerous and at large. Nobody is quite sure where the woman is hiding, but she is likely somewhere in North Africa or Syria. She might not even be alive anymore. She hasn't been seen in years, but that doesn't mean she's not hiding in a hole somewhere planning the next deadly attack. Have you ever met a particularly dangerous woman? Do you know of any female criminals? Were you ever victimized by one? Tell me your story in the comments below. Then, if you haven't subscribed to Talltanic already, fix that now so you can watch all the latest intense videos. Number 6. The Queen of the South. The Queen of the South is a Guatemalan drug trafficker who played a major role in moving illegal substances all the way from Colombia to Mexico and into the United States. Sound dangerous? It was. This is Mallory Chacon, and she worked with a number of major criminal organizations across Latin America for years before she was ultimately captured. One of these organizations included the Sinaloa cartel, once run by the infamous El Chapo. She was clearly involved in some dangerous business, probably making a lot of money for herself. Chacon was captured by authorities and pleaded guilty to drug trafficking back in 2014 in Miami. But she only served part of her sentence after giving up crucial information on other members of crime families throughout Latin America, helping the DEA to indict some of the top members of nefarious organizations. Chacon has since been released, but her whereabouts are unknown. Nobody's sure if she'll fall back into violence and crime or run away and start a new life. But one thing's for sure, this woman is not to be trifled with. Number 5. Shanika Minor. Shanika S. Minor was added to the FBI's Most Wanted Fugitives list back in 2016. She was wanted for her involvement in a brutal homicide and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Even though Shanika was the 509th person put on the FBI's list, she was only the 10th woman since the list was established in March of 1950. The crime occurred when Shanika got into an argument with her mother's neighbor in Wisconsin. Out on the sidewalk, Shanika pulled out a semi-automatic firearm and challenged the neighbor to a fight. At the time, the neighbor was 9 months pregnant. She was in no state to fight. The situation de-escalated and Shanika left. But she came back at 3 a.m. the next day and shot the pregnant woman in the chest inside the hallway of her duplex. The woman fell down dead immediately. Her baby, which had been due in just a week, also died. Now, this person was captured soon after being put on the list. She was out there armed and dangerous. Fortunately for the public, she was apprehended and now sits in prison for the brutal crime. There was actually a reward of up to $100,000 offered for some information that directly led to Shanika's capture. But whether someone actually received the award is not well known at this time. Number 4. Mistakenly wanted. A mistake by Interpol recently resulted in the wrong woman's mugshot being placed on the most wanted list. Adriana Barton from Weymouth in the United Kingdom is a housewife and definitely not a murderer. And yet, she was mistakenly named and placed on the list of most wanted Britons in the world. Imagine what you'd think if this happened to you. She found this out when worried friends and family contacted her about the mistake after seeing an article online. She was being accused of fraud in Costa Rica and labeled as a dangerous fugitive. Thinking quickly, Adriana turned herself in to the local police. She's never been in trouble with the law in her life. And yet, she was forced to spend hours at a police station while the bewildered cops tried to figure out what was going on. Adriana was allowed to go home, but it wasn't for 6 months until the National Crime Agency apologized to the shocked woman. It turned out the NCA had handed over Adriana's passport details and photograph to Interpol in Costa Rica by accident, when the police wanted the information of a different person, who was in fact a criminal suspect. Sadly, Adriana was never compensated for the traumatic mistake. Number 3. The Last Fugitive. This woman has been on the run for over 2 decades and hasn't been caught yet. But she is out there, and the FBI wants to find her. Since 1996, an eco-terrorism group has existed and committed over 40 criminal acts. Many of these crimes included vandalism and arson, with an accumulative $45 million in damages, according to the police. The group was known as The Family. Every last member involved with the group's criminal activities has been apprehended and charged, except for one. Many of them have already served their time and been let out of prison. But one person hasn't been found. Josephine Sunshine Overacre has been on the run since 2001, and authorities seem helpless to catch her. She's believed to now be in her 40s and faces 19 charges, including the destruction of an energy facility. Josephine speaks fluent Spanish and may be hiding out as a masseuse, a firefighter, or a midwife. She uses aliases to keep moving and can somehow keep a low profile and stay out of sight from the authorities. The FBI has an offer going for up to $50,000 for information that leads directly to her arrest. But after many years on the run, nobody knows where she is exactly or if she'll ever stick her head out to be caught. In fact, she was recently spotted in Oregon, leading to renewed interest in her case. This might be one fugitive you might actually be able to claim a reward for if you've seen her anywhere recently. Keep an eye out. Number 2. The Killer Girlfriend. In August of 1998, a woman who called herself Deanna Ray put an ad in the personal section of a local Louisiana newspaper. She described herself as having green eyes, blonde hair, and being hard-working. But she was lying about her identity. She was actually a drifter named Hazel Leota Head who was looking for her next mark. And thanks to her newspaper ad, she found him. Charles Barker responded to the ad after the recent loss of his wife of 11 years. Charles had received a significant amount of money from an insurance settlement and was lonely and depressed. Hazel used this to her advantage and moved in with him the summer of 1998. After that, things took a turn for the worse. Charles's children realized that there was something wrong with the woman. They figured she was just after Charles for his money. And eventually, Charles figured this out too. However, Charles was soon found slumped over the bar in his kitchen with a fresh gunshot wound in the back of his head. When he was found by his sister after not responding to phone calls, he had been dead for at least 5 days. The murder weapon was Charles's own handgun. The safe in Charles's bedroom was empty with about $45,000 in cash gone. His car was also missing, and so was Hazel. It's likely that Hazel killed Charles Barker, but she was never found by the police. Today, she would be 71 years old. She murdered this man over 20 years ago and has been on the run ever since. Number 1. Lady Bomber. Elizabeth Ann Duke is an American fugitive who was involved with radical political organizations and is wanted by the FBI for her part in several bombings, including the bombing of the US Capitol in 1983. She was a member of a splinter group associated with something called the Weathermen Underground, which was a communist organization operating on US soil. They tried to blow up several different government buildings in the 1980s. Elizabeth was arrested in May of 1985 and indicted on charges of falsification, conspiracy, and weapons. But she was released on bail soon after and vanished into thin air. All these years later, the FBI is still looking for her. They have a reward going for $50,000 for any information leading to the capture of Elizabeth Duke.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe to get updates on all our most popular videos.